Our guest speaker today is Sandeed Biswas, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Newcrest Mining. Newcrest is the largest gold producer listed on the ASX and one of the world's largest gold mining companies with operating mines in 4 countries. Sandeed joined Newcrest in January 2014 as Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer, and was promoted to the role of CEO 6 months later. Under his leadership, the company has embarked on an intensive business transformation journey that has delivered remarkable operational and financial gains over the past 3 years. Prior to his time at Newcrest, he served as CEO of Pacific Aluminium, a wholly owned subsidiary of Rio Tinto Group, which incorporated the bauxite, alumina, refining and smelting operations in Australia and in New Zealand. A chemical engineer by trade, Sandeed began his career with Mount Isa Mines, where he says his first job was hosing down filter presses in the process plant, before graduating to wielding a sledgehammer and eventually working his way up to process control, production superintendent, and manager. He did stints in Australia and Europe before joining Western Mining in Australia and then Rio Tinto in Canada and Australia. And those who have worked with Sandeed know him for his sharp intellect, passion for safety, and an uncompromising expectation of accountability for those around him. His favorite expression is, "No results plus excuses does not equal results." I'm going to remember that one at work. But word has it that he has a lighter side, and back in the day was not a too shabby rugby player for Mount Isa West's rugby club, and his teammates at that time included Mick Wilkes from Oceania Gold, Charlie Sartain, formerly Xstrata, and Michael Slafersky of Credit Suisse. He's a keen golfer, fly fisherman, fine wine connoisseur, and describes himself as happiest when he's in the company of his wife Aisha and their 3 children. Members and guests, please welcome to the podium for his first address to the Melbourne Mining Club, Sandeed Biswas.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Patrick, for that introduction. Congratulations to PayDirt, by the way. I think I'm going to have to take a subscription out to your magazine and drop subscription to a bunch of expensive analysts. Well done, by the way. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land where we gather today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the distinguished guests we have here today. Look, in particular, I want to acknowledge the patron of the Melbourne Mining Club, Saravi Parbo, who sent me a kind note yesterday saying he wouldn't be able to attend today. Hope he gets better soon. Saravi is a legend of our industry. I remember when I first met him, I was GM of Kalgoorlie Nickel Smelter for Western Mining in the late 90s. And we're nervous as little children waiting for the great man to arrive and meet him. And he was the most gracious, humble and considerate person you could possibly meet. So it was an honour to meet him then, and it's an honour for me now to present at the club where he's patron. So look, thank you so much to the Melbourne Mining Club for the opportunity to speak here today. Look, my dad was a renowned metallurgist, and so naturally I wound up as a chemical engineer and got into metallurgy anyway. I started my career in research and development, and although now I am CEO of a gold mining company, those who know me know that deep down I'm still a bit of a propeller head, which is why the topic I want to talk to you about is innovation and its role in securing our industry's prosperity. So let's first be clear about the context. Our operating conditions are getting tougher across the board. As we exhaust the more commercially attractive ore bodies, we're going to have to dig deep to convert previously uneconomic or unviable deposits into profitable operations. Innovation, I believe, will have to be at the absolute front and centre for all of us going forward. Australia's contribution to the modern world of mining has been immense. Many of the innovations in the global industry today, the mining industry, started in Australia, and I'll show you a couple later. But the technology and process of the past won't be enough going forward. We'll need more breakthroughs, and we'll need them faster than ever before. So we've got to raise our level of ambition, not only as independent enterprises, but collectively as an industry. And we'll have to build what I call an innovator's mindset. Let me begin with an example of innovation on safety in the front line. So in September 2015, sadly and tragically, we experienced a fatality at our KDO operation near Orange in New South Wales. Our colleague who died had been working to dislodge material from a draw point at our Ridgeway underground mine. For those unfamiliar with caving, material from above gradually works its way down to the extraction drive through what we call draw points. Sometimes the material does get stuck in these draw points, and our operators need to work through a complex set of decision trees to work out how to release that blockage, whether it be water blasting it, drilling it, or drill and blast. So many of these activities are quite intricate due to the tight geometries of draw points and require our people to be on foot in front of these draw points. Following the tragedy, we set a new standard of never having someone on foot near the draw point while carrying out these activities. We didn't know how to do it, nor did anyone else we spoke to, but this was the new standard and the team had to find a way. There were some elements that you could do remotely, quite readily, but others posed a real challenge, like remote explosive charging. Well, the team set about coming up with different ideas on how it could be done. They spoke to suppliers in other mines, they built some mock-up prototypes, conducted field trials, they did a lot of trial and error, and within 6 months, they'd cracked the problem. They found a way to conduct all those activities without the need for being on foot near the draw point. So now all our water canning activities are done from the cab of the machine. Drilling is conducted from remote mobile workstations, and they found a way to remotely charge explosives within those tight geometries. So this has been a great step forward for improving the safety of our people, and interestingly, it's also proving to be more efficient than the previous methods. There's now plans to automate these processes as we go forward. But the reason I'm telling this story, apart from the fact that it's a safety share at the start of this address, is it illustrates what I see as the essence of the innovator's mindset. Having a transformative vision, knowing your objective, but not the solution on how to get there. Being prepared to experiment and to fail. Collaborating with others, drawing in those who can offer expertise and ideas to find solutions quicker, and fast adoption, putting the solutions into practice immediately. This example, as you can see, is not about high-tech gadgets saving the day. The technology elements are, in the end, quite straightforward. It was a mindset that was different. Going back to the fundamentals and asking if there could be a better way to approach the problem. If anyone wants to know more about this, just get in touch with us. We're happy to share whatever we have. So innovation is not new to mining. We've got a long history of it. This chart shows the copper price over the 1900s, more or less to today, as well as the industry cost during that time. The thing I want to draw your attention to in this chart is despite the wild ups and downs, the industry as a whole continues to adapt, and by finding new ways to reduce costs, maintain margins, and meet increasing demand. I've picked copper in this instance, but it's equally applicable to other commodities. Our ability to adapt has been largely driven by innovation in the form of technologies. or new approaches to mining, processing our resources. Research on copper mines indicate that 70% of the decrease in the cost base can actually be accounted for through applied innovation. Take flotation for an example. It's hard to imagine modern mining without it. Flotation enabled to concentrate low-grade minerals and upgrade them so they could be treated as high-grade minerals. It opened up the large sulphide deposits like Broken Hill and other major porphyry deposits throughout the world. Where would we without it? Or take bulk explosives, mechanised mining, large mills. These are the things that gave us a huge step up in productivity from the 60s to the 90s. In the 90s, enter advances in instrumentation, process control. They help lower our cost base. So it's clear we've got a track record, but is that going to be enough to meet the challenges coming at us in the future? And can we do it fast enough? This chart here provides a bit of a snapshot on how long it's taken to go from invention to broad-scale adoption on many pivotal technologies. In many cases, there's a long lead time, but when there's a compelling need, we can apply new technologies relatively quickly. But on the mining's timescale, the definition of quick is about a decade, or let's say, in today's terms, about 2.4 CEOs. At 10 years, flotation also had a fairly rapid rise from being the proven methodology to being commonly adopted. And a key reason it was quick was because of the inventor of this technology, Del Pratt, actually took over as general manager of Broken Hill. On the other side of the coin, of course, there are plenty of other innovations that have taken a much longer time to get into and still not in broad common adoption. Digital advanced process control and high-pressure grinding rolls have been around for 30 years, yet to be widely and deeply adopted across the industry, it's still not the case. So all in all, I think we've done a reasonable job, but it is difficult to call our industry a systematically fast adopter of new technologies. If you're wondering why it takes us so long, there's a few obvious reasons. One is we're driven by necessity. We'll act when under pressure. We've got a difficult deposit that can't be economically developed. We galvanise and we solve the problem. And we're typically risk adverse, right? And innovation does involve risks. We like innovations that have been tried successfully by others first. We all want to be fast followers. It's easy to mount a business case when you can point to Exhibit A that someone else has done. And I know this because I'm guilty of asking the same thing myself. But innovation, by definition, means disrupting the established ways of thinking, and it's going to often test our determination to actually see it through and get the results. So it's not easy, but we're going to have to get used to it, because whether we like it or not, we're going to have to innovate faster as an industry to address the challenges ahead. So the message I've got for the audience today is we need to build an innovation mindset that will accelerate the pace of progress in dealing with these challenges. So one of these challenges is the substantial decline in total factor productivity over the last decade or so. Basically, it's costing us relatively more today to move material than it did a decade ago. Our productivity may have started recovering over the past few years, but we've got a long way to go to make up the difference. And even then, we can't fully counter the fact that strip ratios are increasing and we're mining increasingly more complex and deeper ore bodies. This is further exacerbated by declining grades. If you take gold for an example, in the 60s and 70s, the average gold grade in the world was 12 grams per tonne. It's now about 2 grams a tonne. So as you can see from the chart, the average commodity has fallen in grade about 2.7% a year. So we're spending more to move the tonnes, and there's less of the stuff we want in those tonnes. These factors combine to reduce our overall global mine productivity. So how are we going to tackle these issues as an industry? Well, innovation in mineral processing, I think, has a big role to play in addressing the declining grades. And there's a lot of work going on in two main areas. Firstly, being more selective about what we choose to process. And secondly, boosting the process intensity of the material we put through the plant. In many metalliferous mines, about 20% of the ore contains 80% of the metal. And standard practice for some time has been to grind everything. But it's clear that this must change if we're going to continue to run viable businesses on the ore bodies of the future. We need to find a way to be more efficient about separating the metal from the rock. So I regard this as one of the most significant productivity opportunities for the industry. And if we crack this problem, it can reduce our unit costs, energy and water consumption, which is becoming really, really critical as we go forward, and will also secure longer life operations. And that'd be good for everybody. The good news is there's already some good work going on in this area. And Newcrest was fortunate enough to be an early partner of CRC Ore, which is working to improve overall productivity. In its first collaboration a few years back, CRC Ore worked with our Telfer operation in the Pilbara on a large structured experimentation program to identify at which point in the process we could liberate the waste from the ore. The first task was to dispatch half a dozen scientists and students into the blazing Pilbara desert for about 3 months, which sounds a bit tough, but we did take care of them. We told them to slip, slop, slap and drink plenty of water, and that would sustain them. Anyway, this crew collected loads of samples, we ran the tests, and it showed us that basically in our SAG mill, we're putting scats through the mill that were basically the grade of our tailings. So why do it? So what did we do? We found a way to reject the scats, and we increased our production rate by 20% with the reduction in unit costs, with a small impact on recoveries. The beauty of this collaboration with CRC Ore is that they're now able to share these learnings with other program participants who have benefited from it also. So it's an important advance that we need to nurture. But the journey isn't complete, the techniques are still in their infancy, and we need to expand and accelerate this cooperative R&D work to refine the approaches and technologies as soon as we can. The task is too large for one company, and a broad-based industry cooperation, I believe, is required. Another significant challenge and opportunity of the mining industry is our relatively low asset utilisation. So some of these numbers may surprise you. This chart shows our overall equipment effectiveness based on global data over about the past 10 years across a range of industries. So the obvious thing is the big gap that you see between ourselves and our peers in oil and gas, who are operating at near world-class OEE levels. So relatively speaking, there's huge potential for us to improve our productivity. And while the processes, the basic chemical processes and what have you differ, we obviously have a thing or two to learn from oil and gas. But the opportunity that begs the question is, what would our industry look like if we were able to run our assets at oil and gas type OEEs? It would need a different mindset, including one of continuous manufacturing rather than the stocks and flows that characterise much of the mining industry. So we've also recently done some work at Newcrest, as a bunch of other companies have, that has highlighted to us the importance of data analytics and what's the potential to improve productivity through this. Yet, while we believe the potential is high, as an industry, we use very little of the data and information that's available to us for decision making. The research shows that this can be as low as 1%. We capture about half the information we generate, we store even less of it, we have systems that can only access a certain portion of it, and ultimately we analyse very little for decision-making purposes. So I'm sure that number's not accurate for every company in this room, and I'd like to think it's not the case for Newcrest. Where's my CIO? But the fact is there's a lot of value on the table. So as part of this digital transformation, we've entered into a collaboration with a great organisation called Unearthed, which among things convenes hackathons for the resources sector. So as you may know, hackathons are intensive competitions for bright programmers, data scientists and engineers, typically university and master's students, to produce the best solution, prototype solution for the industry challenge. So in August last year, we set a challenge for one of these hackathons to predict surge events in our Cadia SAG mill. Right? So we're pumping material pretty fast through our plant at Cadia, and our operators are finding that the SAG mill would experience surge events from times, flooding our conveyor and having to reduce our production rate to compensate for several hours. So this was costing us a lot of production. The trouble is we didn't know what factors were leading to these events. So we got the teams to comb through all the data, somewhat sceptically on my part, I must say, but anyway, going through 100 different sets of parameters through gigabytes or terabytes or whatever the terminology is these days. But within a few hours, some of those teams came up with very valuable insights, and that enabled us to begin to make adjustments on how we ran the mill. So you can see the chart, if you just focus on the blue spikes, you can see the dramatic reduction in spikes post the implementation of these controls. And this, of course, has improved the throughput through the KD mill. So we see tremendous value in better utilising data, and we'll continue to support this open collaboration model to uncover other opportunities for improvement in our business. But while we're on the topic of collaboration, I should mention that BHP Billiton sent a team along to the hackathon. I actually found out about it when I got a text from Andrew saying it's about time we started working on some of BHP's opportunities. That's the spirit, Andrew. Look, I promised Anna I wouldn't tell any war stories, but this one just popped into my head when I was in process control back in Mount Isa. So when I think what happens in a nanosecond now in terms of analysis, well, so this was before some of you were born, but back in the mid-80s, we had to go up to the control room with an instrument tech in tow, with discs literally that you had to carry under your arm, go into the back of the control room to with the screwdriver to make sure the right inputs that you wanted to store in the computer were wired in. It was all analog then, and you had only so many analog to digital ports and what have you. The control room operator was standing over you with the foreman accusing you of all sorts of dire consequences, including not being able to have a family. And then you sort of wire it up, then you retire to in those days the computers were probably as big as this area here, in a glass cage, and you're in there in the control room and you're shoving the discs in to get all the data down over multiple hours. The control room operator's wandering in front of you. It's cool in there, but you're sweating away, and he's there like this. Then you schlep it down to the office, and about a week later you find out what you should have done at the time. It now happens at light speed from anywhere in the world. So, if we had those tools back then, I'm sure we would have found new ways of stuffing things up. That was a joke. So, I've discussed the challenges of declining productivity and grades and the potential of improving our operational equipment effectiveness. The final challenge I want to discuss today is that of profitably mining deeper deposits. The top 100 to 200 metres of the Earth's crust has been heavily explored in most regions, not all but most, and will need to go deeper and also undercover for the next generation of discoveries. So the challenge is how we're going to find them and do it cost effectively, and once we do, how we're going to mine them and develop them economically. But let's look at an example. That's exactly the challenge we faced at Cadia East in the 1990s. Back then, the Cadia East mineralisation was regarded as being too low grade and too deep to economically mine. It had a 0 next to it on our reserves ledger. Today, it's over 20 million ounces, the lowest cost operation in our group and one of the lowest cost gold mines in the world. How did that happen? The answer is through collaborative innovation. In the 1990s, we joined an international caving study group convened by the JKMRC with Cyro, Rio Tinto, Codelco from Chile and others. Together, this group spent a number of years trialling different caving techniques to help the rock fragment and cave more readily, We also tried different monitoring innovations so we could track the rock flow processes. We shared information with the study group, and the result was a faster learning by all the participants, and ultimately, faster adoption of the block caving technology. I'd like to stress that if this had been left up to any one single company, we'd probably still be refining the methodology today. But by 2005, in contrast, Newcrest had the confidence that it could safely and reliably develop block caves in deep, strong ground. And this enabled Newcrest to make a $2 billion plus investment decision, which has transformed the company. So to me, the benefits of innovation and the benefits of collaboration are clear. We've got a strong interest in supercharging our efforts to accelerate the pace of innovation in our industry. This is an exciting time in the history of our industry. We've got some big challenges ahead for sure, but also some great opportunities. And the next chapter in our story belongs to the innovators, those who have the courage to think differently and experiment, learn from others, collaborate effectively, and who'll quickly adapt and adopt. We've got a proud history of innovation in our industry, and we in Australia in particular, with our rich mineral endowment, leading mining companies, leading equipment and service providers, and our broad-based scientific and R&D institutions and organisations, have an unrivalled foundation to accelerate the pace of innovation in the mining and resources industry worldwide. Thank you.
Sandeed has kindly offered to answer some questions, so if anyone in the audience has a question, there's 2 roving microphones around, one over on this side of the room and one over on that, so attract the attention of the person necessary. If you wouldn't mind standing and stating your affiliation and your name, and then ask your question. Thanks very much. First one.
Yes, Sandy. Sandy Gray from Gecko Systems. Thanks for a fantastic speech, right up our alley. Innovation, it's what we do and we love it. I guess for us the question is, what do you guys see as being the best structure and the best way for us all through collaboration, because bringing the collaborative people together, the companies together, bringing the organisations, CRCOR and all of those groups, Amira, how do we bring it all together from your perspective, or what's the most beneficial route to increasing the rate of innovation, I guess, from your perspective?
Thank you for that straightforward question. Look, I'd like to think of this in 2 different ways. The first one is kind of like the big ticket breakthroughs. I think this is where we already have the models, right, through CRC, through Sustainable Mining Institute. We've got, I think, the institutions, Sarah, to work, but you know, we as industry and equipment suppliers need to come in on those big ticket items, identify the problem, generate a desire to solve the problem. But I think, as with the learnings from digital and what's happening with the hackathons I talked about and what have you, I'm aware we've got about 4,000 or 5,000 small to medium enterprises in our mining space and suppliers. One of the ways at the kind of, not the major innovation space, is there something equivalent where companies like us and others could put forward, more straightforward problems? I mean, the SAG mill may be one example, but there's plenty of others where the providers could come in and solve these problems in that sort of an environment. I think we've got to have the communication and linkages that technology now provides us to link in all the people together at that level. So that's how I think about it. How one does that, of course, is an interesting challenge, but I have been speaking about this to Elizabeth, so that's just my perspective on it. I hope that helps.
Sandeed, Richard Loftman, Rex Minerals. First of all, and I must disclose I've been a shareholder through this period, but you absolutely have to be congratulated, taking the company from $10 to 23 odd, which it is today.
I'll buy you a beer later, Richard.
That's been totally fantastic, and you know, this is a good audience for that. Really appreciate it. What's of interest to me, Sandeep, in your presentation was a little instructive. You put up a few slides there about copper, and many of us know that your true love and your background is copper, and a little bit of nickel, and some aluminium. How are you going to take Newcrest from 23 to 43 for the next part of that journey? And are you interested in diversifying out of just gold or gold and copper to some exciting minerals like copper in the future? Intrigued to hear.
Thank you, Richard. Richard's the other gem that I met in Kalgoorlie. So, in terms of, well, thank you so much for the compliment, firstly. So look, Newcrest has reached a position now where our operational turnaround of existing assets is probably about 50% done. There's still a lot of value on the table within our current asset portfolio, the growth of Lihir, the growth of Cadia, which we're working on in terms of planning. But we're also now moving more towards the growth phase. But our preferred mode is through partnering with people at the early phase, exploring ourselves through grassroots exploration, as opposed to big ticket M&A. But in terms of diversifying, we now see copper as I think we see ourselves as a gold copper company these days, but it's doubtful that we would expand beyond that deliberately. But if we're going exploring for gold and happen to find the best zinc deposit in the world, we'll find a way to make money out of it, right? But essentially our focus is gold and copper. And we do want to grow the business, but big ticket M&A is not our preferred way of doing it. It's more about, what you and Rex are up to, which is about getting it at the grassroots and developing a new business. Thanks for the question.
Hi, Sandeed, Lex MacArthur, Jolimont Global. Thanks for the presentation. It seems that we're really good at doing small innovations really quickly. So innovations that perhaps have the benefit of less than 1% in terms of operating costs or revenue growth. The big transformative innovations like block caving at Cadia, they take a long time. It'd be great for the industry if we have more examples of transformative innovations that took place within a year, so that we could actually say, we have changed and we are getting much better at this. Are there any examples at Newcrest where you've got a transformative innovation that has taken a short period of time?
Thank you, Lex. Well, you get the easy questions here. So, look, we've talked a lot about Cadia. Let's talk about Lihir, right? I mean, Lihir is now making money, which hasn't been the case for a long time, and we're getting into the rhythm of starting to meet our targets and get our unit costs down. But if I think back to all the noise around Lihir when I joined the company, there was a lot of stuff myself, and I am a chemical engineer deep down, and some of the people within the company and some experts we brought in. What we couldn't understand was why the autoclaves were a bottleneck, right? I mean, I and others like John O'Callaghan was a key proponent of this. We'd had pressure leaching experience in zinc and other places, and we found this to be highly interesting. So we went down and analysed the mineralogy. So this actually, Alex, this is an innovation. I mean, electron microscope to find out that the fundamental of the ore body was literally, we had this model in our head that we had to burn all the sulphur in the ore body, so it's a refractory ore body, to get all the gold that was available. But in the end, it's another one of those 80-20 rules. Most of the gold was associated with only about 20 or 30% of the sulphur. So paradigm, why are we running our autoclaves at full oxidation, and the autoclaves are the bottleneck, and our feed to the autoclave, the mills and all that, were coasting. So this is an example of, I guess courage in a way, because I recall back We did all the work, we've done all the safety analysis and all the redox potentials. I won't bore you with the detail. But then I remember John O'Callaghan gave me a call and said, look, boss, we got this right. We've done the math, we've done all the tests, we want to go to partial oxidation. The autoclave won't flame out. We're going to make exactly the same amount of gold, more or less, but the bottleneck will no longer be the autoclave. So I said, okay. So he asked for permission, I gave the okay. That was in December 2014, and we've never stopped. They literally overnight took the autoclave away from being the bottleneck of Lahire and put it more onto the crushing and milling circuit. And as you'll see, we're now up to a 13 million tonne milling rate. Back then we were at 10, and we have ambition to go to 15 and potentially beyond. So that was done end to end within about 6 months, Lex. So I think there's a good example which I think fits your bill.
Gilbert Ralph, retired executive at WMC. Sandeed, I've observed your career with a great deal of interest since you joined the WMC nickel smelter in Kalgoorlie. And I've noted also that 3 former executives of senior management within WMC have succeeded to the position as Chief Executive Officer of Newcrest, namely Tony Palmer and Ian Smith and yourself. Is this a coincidence, or is there something behind all of that? But more particularly, what do you see are the challenges for chief executive officers in an ever-changing minerals industry throughout the world? Are they environmental, political, exploration, technology? What do you see as the future for executives?
Again, thanks for the straightforward question. So in terms of the CEO succession, I think that is a coincidence, but the industry's a small place as well. So if you when I've worked for WMC, Rio Tinto, Anaconda Nickel, and Mount Isa Mine, so you're going to have common, a lot of common succession across people that you do know. So that is coincidence. But to the more serious question about what are the challenges, look, this is my first CEO job of a public company. The entire governance piece around public companies is something that one has to grapple with, and that is becoming even greater, quite rightly, if you see some of what has gone on. But it's also got to be done efficiently, and I think that's a challenge for all of us. But the challenges across the multi-dimensions that you point to, it also depends on where you operate. But community and government is becoming more and more important as resource nationalism gets a bit of a increase running in a lot of different countries. Community expectations, quite rightly, increased. What are you adding back to the community as opposed to taking out of the ground? So it's far more complex than it used to be. But we also have access to great people who know how to deal with these things. The communication, the technology, the understanding is also increasing. So I think it's a very exciting challenge. I'm only 2.5 years into it. But I think, it's very challenging, which I love, and exciting, and I continue to learn. So I'm not daunted by it, but you've got to continually keep on the go, that's for sure. I think this is the last question, right?
Rohini Kapadat from KPMG. Sandeep, outstanding presentation, thank you. My question to you is that, in a future that will be largely driven by the Internet of Things, how might you be considering taking Newcrest mining down the path of becoming an artificial intelligence-enabled business? Do you see, what sort of a role do you see? What sort of future do you see?
Look, I think that's a very good question. Look, I think we've got to be open our mind to it. In terms of the Internet of Things, we haven't kind of got to that level yet, although that's a booming space, I agree with you. But what we are experimenting is with Watson from IBM. I don't know whether you're familiar with that or not, but so that's kind of our first foray into understanding what artificial intelligence can be or could be, and how we can instead of just the sake of doing it and saying we're going digital and what have you, but actually what does it add to the bottom line? What's the cash-on-cash returns? What's the delivery time frame? Where does it add value? So I think that's a big opportunity for us, but honestly, I think we've really got to get our minds around how much value does this stuff really add to a business like ours. But it's really exciting, and we absolutely intend to pursue it.
Thanks very much for those questions, and thanks for the answers. Now, I'd just like to introduce Lorraine Meldrum, CEO of Swan Global, to offer a formal vote of thanks. Lorraine.
There are three key facts to bear in mind regarding our speaker today, Sandeed Biswas, following him taking over as Managing Director and CEO at Newcrest Mining. Lahir, many or most would say the problem child, is now behaving well. Best ever reliability, producing more gold per tonne of ore processed, and showing potential for increases. Overall, Newcrest mines are processing more tonnes and producing more gold, and profits are at their best. Furthermore, there is a mandate to pivot towards growing the portfolio of mines. Yes, there's more to come. It's all good news. Good for the company and its shareholders, good for the staff, and good for Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Sandeed Biswas for yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Lorraine, and thanks to Sandeed. Now, members and guests, this is the bit we like best, giving away your money. I'd like to ask Richard Morrow to put his jacket on and represent Sir Avi Parbo on stage as the Chairman of the Melbourne Mining Club to give away some of our hard-earned. Richard?